Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Anna Bush. I am the Stormwater TMDL liaison. We also have some other MS4 staff on the call with us today, so if I run into trouble, they can help us out. So thanks everyone for being here. This is the third TMDL application form webinar. The first webinar on February 16th was 2.5 hours long, and it was a general overview. February 23rd's webinar discussed just the South Metro Mississippi Total Suspended Solids TMDL. And today we're going to talk more generally about categorical waste load allocations. The next webinar will be in 2 weeks on March 23rd, and that will be a general question and answer session. So bring your questions. I won't have much of a formal presentation otherwise. Just some quick WebEx stuff before we move on. Everyone was muted on entry, but you can unmute yourselves. So if you're lost in the middle, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Otherwise, we'll primarily be using the chat box for asking questions. So you can put those in the chat box at any time throughout the presentation. Please send the question to everyone so we all can see it. But at the end, if you want to ask your question verbally, you can use the little emoji guy at the bottom there to, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong, this guy, if you want to raise your hand to ask your question out loud so we're not talking over each other. And there should be enough time at the end for questions and answers. Next thing I wanted to mention before we get started is that the TMDL application forms have been moved to a different site. A lot of people were having trouble with the FTP site, so they've been moved to a share-based location. So everyone should be able to access those. Just wanted to let folks know. All right, now on to the fun part. Okay, so the plan for the morning, we'll quickly talk about the important vocabulary, make sure everyone's on the same page, talk about the differences between a categorical and individual waste load allocations. We'll walk through the options for dealing with a categorical waste load allocation in the TMDL application form, go over some of the new resources that we've got, and then we'll go through the questions and answers that folks put in the chat. But again, if you're totally lost, just stop me and we can deal with that. I won't be able to see questions chat during the presentation. Okay, so my apologies for those that have heard this 3 times before, but it's pretty fundamental concept, so I want to make sure we're all on the same page. What is a TMDL? It is 2 things. Total maximum daily load is what TMDL stands for. It's both an equation and a report. It's a requirement that we have to complete a TMDL once a water body, so a lake or a stream, is found to be polluted or impaired. They can be polluted by any number of things, you know, chloride, nutrients, sediment, bacteria. In any case, once a water body is found to be polluted, we have to figure out the recipe to get it back to a unpolluted state. So MPCA cooperates with local governments and sometimes consultants to develop the total maximum daily load. We look for where the pollutants are coming from and how much of a pollutant can still enter a water body and the water get back to a clean state. So once the TMDL is done, we submit it to the EPA, and then once they approve it, it triggers MS4 permit requirements in the next permit cycle. So here you can see the equation itself. So we're worried about the WLA, or the waste load allocation portion. That's the amount of pollutant that point sources are allowed to send to the impaired water. So in the table, you can see there's some wastewater treatment plants and MS4. It would also include construction and industrial stormwater. The load allocation or LA section is for general watershed runoff. So non-point sources, unregulated MS4 stormwater, ag, general runoff, etc. And every impaired water gets a separate TMDL for each pollutant. So you can have one stream that's impaired for nutrients, bacteria, and total suspended solids. And so it would get 3 different TMDLs. So 3 of these different tables and equations. All right, so what is the difference between a categorical waste load allocation and an individual waste load allocation? On the screen, you can see I have on the left is an example of an individual waste load allocation. So you can see that each MS4 has their own amount that they get assigned. On the right, you can see this is a categorical. And so all of those that each one is they're all added together, and you don't know how much goes to municipality A, how much goes to B, or how much goes to C unless you do some other work. So this is what it could look like in the actual TMDL report. How do you know if you have a categorical or an individual waste load allocation when you're looking at your TMDL application form? On your applicable waste load allocation determination tab, you would look in column E. So, and you can see it says waste load allocation type, and it would either say categorical or individual here. So if it's categorical, that means you have categorical waste load allocation. And you may also have categorical waste load allocations for bacteria, chloride, and temperature, but we aren't discussing those in this webinar because you just need to make determinations for oxygen demand, nitrate, total suspended solids, and total phosphorus. So that's what we're focusing on. So for those pollutants, you have to decide if you are meeting your applicable waste load allocations or not before you can complete the form. And there are 4 possible ways to determine if you're meeting a waste load allocation or not. We're going to go through each one. Okay, so first option, you are looking at your applicable waste load allocation determination tab, and you look in column I, and there is a % reduction there. If you have a % reduction, I would suggest that you use it. And if there's multiple flow conditions, if it's a stream, you would target or you would use the mid-flow range to figure out if you're meeting or not. If it says not available or insufficient data, then you'd have to do one of the other options, and we'll talk about those. But so if you have a % reduction, so you have your 19% at mid-flow for the Coon Creek TP impairment, then you can go to for example, you can go to the simple estimator, put in your BMPs that were installed since the baseline year, which is found on the TMDL master list tab, and then use your % reduction. So with the BMPs I put in for this one, I'm at a 40% reduction, so that means I win. All right, any general questions on this first option before we move on to the next one? Okay. Okay, next option is using an aggregator. So several TMDLs have been written with a categorical waste load allocation because the permittees had agreed to address the impairment collectively. So if we're looking at our example waste load allocation, these 3 municipalities can decide we are going to work together to decide if we are meeting the waste load allocation or not, and to implement practices to restore the impaired water. So in that case, perhaps municipality A is a watershed district, so they might agree to track some of these things, or it could just be any municipality if you want to come to that agreement. So you would use all the all the BMPs since the baseline year in the report in the entire MS4 regulated area. So for all 3 municipalities, the regulated area that was outlined in the TMDL, and determine whether you're meeting the waste load allocation as a whole. So if you do this, you don't need to determine individual target loads, which we'll be talking about later, but you're all equally responsible for items in the compliance schedule. Everybody still does need to submit your TMDL application form, but we have some workarounds so you don't have to necessarily duplicate everything everybody's doing. And then you'd have to note it in a couple of spots in the PDF portion of the application, both in question 174, which is the very last question in the PDF form, and then you have to note the partnerships in questions 6 and 7 of the PDF portion of the application. So let's look at this a little more closely. So how do you know who is included in a categorical waste load allocation with you? You can, of course, always look at the TMDL report, but the information is also included in the TMDL application form. And I just want to note that it depends on both who is included in a categorical waste load allocation depends on they be specific to the TMDL project. So for example, if you have a big area, there'd be one group that's included in the TMDL project, but then when you look at specific water bodies, some of those permittees might drop out. So you need to look at both. But in general, so you're looking at your applicable waste load allocation determination tab, and you can see the name of the TMDL project here, Coon Creek Watershed District RAPS 2010. So that's a categorical. So then you can go to the master list tab, TMDL master list. So when you downloaded your application form, this tab was originally filtered to show just your municipality's projects, but you can use the filters as well to see who else is assigned to the same categorical waste load allocation. So on any of these, my mouse, the little carrots in the boxes at the top of the page, if you click on those, if you click on it, then it will show you the list. So this original list all these boxes would have been checked because it would have been showing all of your TMDL projects. So if you just want to see who else is included in this one, the Coon Creek Watershed District, you would unselect the other ones and then just click that checkbox and click OK. And then you go over to the permittee name column, click on the little caret, and then it would show you the list of the municipalities that are included in that TMDL. Okay, so back to our example. So say these 3 municipalities have been working together, they want to go the aggregator route. They would look at their land use and BMPs and figure out if they're meeting the waste load allocation as a whole. So if they come in as their load for all 3 over that regulated area comes in under 9.7 pounds per day or under. So then they would go to the TMDL application form. Oh, if they say, sorry, this one, first chance they decide they are not meeting, say they're at 10 pounds instead of 9.7. So they would complete the compliance schedule. You can type in under the BMP tab. If you might be easier to submit a separate spreadsheet noting your BMPs, and that is acceptable as long as it includes the same information found in the TMDL application form and you reference it on the form. So you can type into this box here, and then you can attach a separate form with your application. But let's say they thought they were meeting. then they can decide whether they're meeting via pounds reduced or percent reduction. They would put in what the whole group, what their reduction was, the method they used. You should have your calculations available. This is part of a categorical. You would say you're not determining your portion because you're meeting the categorical as a group. So you could type that in there. All right. And then did want to note if sorry, looking at too many things at once. If you are interested in being invited to a discussion on using the aggregator method, please put your email address in the chat box and we will send out a separate invitation for that. But otherwise, I wanted to make sure there weren't any general questions on this method before we move on. There's lots of questions in the chat. Okay. Go through some of these questions at the end. Okay. All right, next option. Okay, so there were some categorical TMDLs that had no associated percent reduction. And so PCA staff used the watershed area associated with the MS4s and the TMDLs to determine loading rates similar to the South Metro Mississippi TSS TMDL. So that was luckily a fairly short list. So we have calculated loading rates for, so pounds per acre per year for each of these TMDL projects listed. And the loading rates can be found in a spreadsheet that is on the guidance for categorical TMDLs page on the Stormwater Manual. So similar to the South Metro Mississippi TSS TMDL, you can use the simple estimator, put in your regulated area land use, and then check the summary sheet tab to see your loading rate in pounds per acre per year. It's probably not going to be meeting any of those waste load allocations. So then you would add in BMPs installed since the baseline year in the report, which again you can find in column M on the TMDL master list tab, and see if that allows you to meet the loading rate. And so on, and then there was also the default loads, which is under the simple estimator section. Here's a screenshot from the simple estimator summary tab, and you can see there's a section for loading rates in pounds per acre per year. So you can see if the loading rate in the spreadsheet for those projects will let you meet the waste load allocation or not. So if you figure out your loading rate is meeting the calculated loading rate from that spreadsheet, this is how you would note it on the TMDL application. Enter the loading rate, and then in this box you put in your calculated, what you figure out from the estimator is your loading rate, or MIDS or whatever method you used, whether you have the calculations available. Yes, this is part of a categorical. You put other, and then say we use the calculated loading rate, and then here in the notes section you would enter the MPCA calculated loading rate that came from that spreadsheet. So if you attended the South Metro Mississippi TSS TMDL webinar, this is not what I told you 2 weeks ago, but this is how we would like those to be dealt with. So this is how you would deal with the South Metro too. So you'd put whatever your loading rate was here, and then you would enter the for example, for South Missouri, you put 154 pounds per acre per year in this box. Okay. Okay. Moving on to the last option. This is calculating an individual target load. So you would have to look at the TMDL report to reference how the categorical waste load allocation was determined originally. This is probably would have been an area approach, and you can also check to see if there's a completed implementation plan. So if there's not a percent reduction, the other municipalities are not interested in using the aggregator method, so you're going to have to derive your own target load. There should not be too many of these because I hopefully found all of the TMDL projects that didn't have a percent reduction. But if you really don't want to use the percent reduction, you can try to derive a target load. This is takes a lot more work. So again, if we go back to our original example, you have the 3 municipalities, which your TMDL table just has your 9.7 pounds per day for everybody. So you have to look in the report, you find, oh, there's, luckily this one has a table with the MS4 areas within the contributing watershed. So you would use that to divvy up the waste load allocation into a target load. So for example, municipality A is 300 acres out of 375, so that's 80% of the area. 80% of the area, multiply 80% times 9.7 pounds per day. Whoa, oops, sorry. Come up with your, then they would take 7.76 pounds of that overall waste load allocation. And this is where you can use that in the simple estimator. You have the ability to use just the load. So this would be, this could be what folks would have to use also for an individual waste load allocation. If there is no percent reduction, they can use the estimator to figure out the load, but they at least don't have to do any math to figure out what their portion of the waste load allocation is, because if you have an individual waste load allocation, you can just use that number as the to see if you're meeting with the final load or not. And the example I gave for this divvying out a target load was pretty simple, and the necessary information was easy to find. In most cases, you're going to have to do quite a bit of sleuthing to figure out the information you need to derive a target load. There might not be an easy to find table of contributing areas. You may need to do some GIS exercises based on land use, etc. And there's more information about methods on the categorical guidance page. And speaking of guidance, so the TMDL's page in the stormwater manual, we have updated the guidance on the categorical TMDLs. And there is also a, we have shape files posted for a bunch of TMDL projects, which will help with both categorical and individual waste load allocations. Should include subwatershed areas used in the project. It may include MS4 areas or what they used in the report. It may not. I still have a couple dozen files to upload, but those should be done by the end of the week now that I'm done with this. And there is the link, and you can also get it from the categorical guidance page. It's at the bottom. Okay, and then so everybody knows, since we are these, they're all being posted on the MS4 webinars and videos page. So the original, original recording going over the PDF application is there. The first TMDL webinar, the second one on the South Metro Mississippi, and then the Simple Estimator webinar is also posted. And as soon as I get the recording for this, we'll post it on this page as well. All right. So, and again, if you're interested in being invited to a discussion on using the aggregator method, put your email address in the chat box. We'll start on the questions now. And we sent out a survey about webinars and guidance. I do believe Carly is going to put the link to that in the chat if you haven't responded to that survey. Let me stop sharing so I can look at the questions. Okay. All right. Sorry. Okay, why were some TMDL waste load allocations done as categorical waste load allocations instead of individual waste load allocations for MS4 permittees? That was a decision made by whoever the TMDL writers were at the time. And it's not something we necessarily have control over, although we are recommending that they don't do that anymore. So, but in some cases it was an agreement at the time that they thought it was the best way to deal with a waste load allocation was to do it as a group. All right, where is this page? I'm not sure which page. All the links that of pages I was showing will be in the when I PDF the PowerPoint, so you'll be able to find it in the MS4 webinars and videos, but I will oops, I'll put some of these in the chat right now so people have them. Just a second. You can find the application form links from this link. Okay, oops. I'm sorry, difficulties. Okay, this first link should get you to the, that not work? Yeah. Yep, the guidance for completing the TMDL application form, the links to the site with the applications is on there. And then the general TMDL guidance page or for different topics is here. And you'll be able to find the webinars and videos here. But again, all these links are in the PowerPoint, which when I post it, you'll be able to click on anything in there to find them. Okay, back to the questions. All right. One of our waste load allocations does not have a mid-flow range. We only have a high and low. Do we take the average for that waste load allocation, or how would it be addressed? Reach out to me and I'll take a look at it. But yes, in general, there's a guidance page for flow base, but yes, when there's no mid flow, I would have to look at it. What if the TMDL indicates that the flow condition that issues occur at is not the mid-level, but the high or low flow condition? Should we still use the mid-level flow condition to determine if we are meeting our waste load allocation? I think that is what we have in general determined is the best route to go. Yes. Someone noted there's an issue with the simple estimator spreadsheet, row 11, column D. This row is for area 7, subwatershed 7, but it's pointed the area 6 worksheet instead. Think a corrected estimator was posted. Maybe it wasn't, but we'll make sure that Mike knows about that if that's a different error. But
Anna, this is Mike.
Yep.
Yeah, I did correct that and put the
Okay.
updated version on the appropriate pages in the manual.
Okay, thanks. I wasn't sure if that was the same error or a different one. Okay, next question. How can a permittee find the aggregator for a categorical waste load allocation? Well, whoever is the aggregator has to agree. It may have been suggested in the TMDL, so I would start by looking at the TMDL report or the implementation plan. And on the categorical guidance page, there are links to the TMDL project pages, so you can look up the TMDL project and download the report. Next question, can the aggregator for the waste load allocation complete a single TMDL application form for all the permittees in the TMDL drainage area, or must each and every MS4 permittee submit an aggregated TMDL application form for that TMDL? So the issue with this is that each permittee has a different application form. Excuse me. One TMDL most likely has several, for example, if you look at the Coon Creek watershed district, just as an example, there are several impaired reaches within that report, and not all permittees are included in each reach. So unfortunately, we can't just do one. We can't copy and paste everything into each and just submit one form for all of the permittees. But that is why I was suggesting you can absolutely, if you just want to do one spreadsheet and submit that separately from the TMDL application form, that is acceptable. So, but each permittee still has to submit their TMDL application form. They can reference the additional sheet that might be similar to the other permittees. Does that make sense? Okay. What should a city do if they know that the MS4 area for their city that was listed in the TMDL is wrong? The TMDL area may, for example, include land within the city that is landlocked and is never drained to the receiving water. TMDL land area may also include a portion of the city that is not served by the city's conveyance system. Do you believe the guidance on this is contact me, but in general, we are encouraging permittees to use the drainage area they believe to be correct. But they would need to note what they're using. All right, you talked about only the land area method for estimating an individual waste load allocation from a categorical waste load allocation. Are you suggesting that people not use the other three methods listed on the manual page? I am suggesting that people should use whatever method was used in their individual TMDL report, which in the most cases was the area method. Please repeat the description of the percent load reduction method of estimating TMDL compliance. So if I go back to, I'll share my screen again. Okay. Okay. So if you're looking at, and this applies for either categoricals or individual waste load allocation, if you go to column I on the applicable waste load allocations determination tab, it should, if it shows a percent reduction, you can use that. Most helpful if you have a mid-flow. Then you can enter BMPs installed since the baseline year in, for example, the estimator, or I'm not as familiar with the MIDS calculator, other options, and then compare that percent reduction that's here with whatever is in the column I and see if you are meeting or not. All right. Any other questions? You can unmute if you want to ask one out loud or type it into the chat. Any clarification needed? Well, apparently only Randy's going to be invited to the aggregator meeting. If anyone else is interested in discussing that, please drop it in the chat or send us an email.
Hi, this is Jim Langseth. I had a question. So looking at a categorical waste load allocation with the flow condition mid, I show a percent reduction of 0, but if it was high or very high, I would have a percent reduction, or very low, I'd have a percent reduction. From what you said, I operate off of that mid, no percent reduction required.
That
This happens to be bacterial E. coli on a unnamed creek.
Oh, well, so for bacterial, whether you have for bacteria, you have to, since you don't have to report on or make a determination, you still need to apply with the permit conditions for bacteria waste load allocation. So if you have, I think with bacteria, if you have a waste load allocation, it doesn't matter what flow zone it is. If you have if it's showing up on your bacteria tab, you have to comply with the permit requirements for bacteria. But you don't have to make a determination whether you're meeting or not. That's for the total phosphorus, total suspended solids.
Okay, thanks.
Anna, this is
Yeah.
Mike. Most of the time, at low flow conditions, the problems are associated with bacteria, and so you're right. That's different than TSS or phosphorus.
Right.
At the high flow conditions, if you don't have a reduction at the mid flow, but you do at one of the higher flow regimes, you probably should contact us. There is a reason why we go with the mid flow, and a bit of a long explanation. What it is that at the higher flows, a lot of the problems with the pollutant are associated with in-stream processes, but that gets dumped into the load allocation. So if the permittee is practicing infiltration practices that actually reduce flow, they're not going to get credit for them at that high flow because that load went into the load allocation. So if you don't have a reduction at mid flow for phosphorus or sediment, but you do at the higher flow, contact us.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, When using the simple estimator to determine if you're meeting a % reduction waste load allocation, how do you suggest entering watershed information into the calculator where BMPs, e.g. ponds, were installed prior to the baseline year? We cannot take credit for them towards meeting the waste load allocation, but we can't ignore that they are still there in the drainage area. Right. So you would put those, Mike, you can certainly, well, Mike, do you just want to take this instead of me trying it?
I was kind of counting on you to take a shot. Yeah, this is a tough situation. I think the best scenario maybe is to somehow try to incorporate those into your initial, if you remember the estimator's got that section 1, which is the unadjusted loads. If you can somehow address those ponds in there, that I think that's probably the best solution. This might be something that I'll take a look at. Maybe we can put some guidance together and get that into the manual.
If it makes you feel any better, that's what I was going to suggest too. So.
Okay, good. As long as I'm on the line real quick here, I'm just going to real briefly mention that in the next day or two, we're going to be setting up several training sessions for the estimators. So if you're interested in the training for that, look for email sometime later this week or early next week on that.
Thanks, Mike. Any other questions? All right, well, hopefully this was helpful. Again, we'll post this as soon as it's ready on the MS4 webinars and videos page along with PowerPoint. You can look there for previous recordings, look at the updated guidance, and let me know if you have any other questions. Otherwise, thanks everyone.